So, did anybody have the occasion to watch Home Alone? Excellent. Anybody else watch Home Alone this Christmas? Okay, right, with them. Okay. Y'all, Home Alone. You know there's like 10 of them now. My brother and I watched the first one, which is the original from 1990, a total classic, and then I made him watch Home Alone 2. Not as good. And then there's Home Alone 3 and Home Alone 4, and now there's a new one out this year called Home Sweet Home Alone. I haven't seen it, so I can't say anything about it, but I have opinions, I'm sure. We did a Zoom call with my family yesterday, and my nephews had watched all of the Home Alones this year, like you do. So it's this classic where 8-year-old Kevin found himself home alone before Christmas. Now, Kevin didn't intentionally stay behind. In the chaos of trying to get a big family out the door for Christmas vacation and all of the hubbub and chaos, he was accidentally left behind. And when he realized that he was home alone, he went a little wild. He ate whatever he wanted. He went into forbidden spaces like his big brother's room. He used his father's aftershave, which is that classic scene of the hands on the face screaming. He went grocery shopping alone, and he conquered his fear of the basement while he was doing his laundry. He also found his way into a church on Christmas Eve and was honest with his neighbor, had this really beautiful heart-to-heart exchange about missing his family and the meaning of Christmas. And when all is said and done, after he's defended his house from burglars and his family came back home, he was genuinely happy to see them, and he had grown up a lot. And maybe I'm reading more into the story, but it always seemed to me that at the end of the movie, that Kevin had matured a bit, that he had come into his own, that he had a better sense of his place, his belonging in the family, of his place in the world, and of feeling more at home in his home, a bit more ownership. Now, I know Dave said earlier that Jesus chose to stay behind, but our text is a little ambiguous. Was it Jesus' choice, or did he get lost in the shuffle? We're not totally clear. Either way, he ended up in the temple for days, at least 4 days, our text says, without his parents around, without his family around, and it seems like he really loved it. He was able to sit at the feet of rabbis and teachers and soak up their knowledge, to ask questions, and our text says, all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And Kevin from Home Alone might have eaten a lot of junk food and defended his house against burglars with his newfound freedom, but Jesus was also enjoying a freedom he'd probably never had before. He might not have eaten junk food, but he was 12, so maybe. But there were no parents there to tell him to leave the rabbis alone, to call it a day. Nobody to tell him that it was time for bed. Nobody to tell him that he needed to leave the temple. His father's house. By the time that his family came and found him, I can imagine that Jesus had matured a lot, that he had come into his own a bit, that he had a better sense of his belonging in the family, of his place in the world, and of feeling more at home in his home, God's holy house. It's a part of the magic and mystery of the Christmas story that through the birth of Jesus, that God has made a home on earth here with us. That God doesn't come into this perfect world, but into this very broken world. That doesn't come into our perfect lives, but into our very broken lives. And says, I want to live with you. I want to be in your heart. I'm going to make my home in your world. And Jesus finds his home in the temple. It's really this cosmic both and that we've been talking about through Advent and now Christmastide, that God is both at home on earth here with us, and also our home is with God. It's amazing, really, to think of 12-year-old Jesus in the temple is to picture God as a child, as an infant, this infant that we hear about in our nativity story. This infant becomes a toddler, and then a child growing up in a family and community, trying to figure out, what is he going to be when he grows up? What is God's call on this child's life? What is this connection that this child has with God? What does it all mean? And we're told that Mary treasures all of these things in her heart. Author Rachel Held Evans died a couple of years ago, young. Before she died, she was working on her latest book called Wholehearted Faith. And after she died, a friend picked up the manuscript and helped complete it. So I've been reading it over the last couple of weeks. And here's what Rachel Held Evans wrote in Wholehearted Faith. It is nearly impossible to believe God shrinking down to the size of a zygote, implanted in the soft lining of a woman's womb. God growing fingers and toes, God kicking and hiccuping in utero, God inching down the birth canal and entering this world covered in blood, perhaps into the steady, waiting arms of a midwife. God crying out in hunger, God reaching for his mother's breasts, God totally relaxed, eyes closed, his chubby little arms raised over his head in a posture of complete trust. God resting in his mother's lap. Before Jesus fed us with the bread and the wine, the body and the blood, Jesus himself needed to be fed by a woman. He needed a woman to say, "This is my body given for you." God became vulnerable. This vulnerable God, this vulnerable God coming to us in human form as an innocent baby born in a humble stable is so countercultural to a world that says power and money and influence have the final word. That bigger means better, that vulnerability is weak. But through the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, we know that true power is found through vulnerability. True freedom is found in loving with abandon. True liberation is found in giving freely and generously of ourselves and all that we have to God and to one another. We've all had an unbelievably stressful few years. I don't need to rehash it. Y'all know what I mean. This is an opportunity. This Christmas, this turning point into a new year, to decide what we will do with all that we have experienced and all that we have been through. How will we process all of this? How will we move forward? How have we matured? How have we come into our own a bit? Do we have a better sense of our belonging in our families, of our place in the world, and feeling more at home wherever we claim home to be, however we want to define home? So just as this vulnerable God chooses to make a home here with us, let us choose to make a home for God in our lives, in our hearts, in our families, in our midst, just as Jesus chose to make a home in God's temple. Perhaps you choose to make a home or to keep your home here in this family of faith at BPC. And surround yourself always with people who love you and who lift you up. Merry Christmas, y'all. And I hope that everyone feels the love and joy of God at home in our midst. Amen.